Welcome back to the Red Dice Diaries with John and Hannah.
Hi.
And it's time for another voicemail episode. So let's crack open the postbag and see who we've got on this week. Our first call is from Randy at the Biggest Geekers podcast. Take it away, Randy.
Been a while since I've called in. Love the Jenny Greenteeth episode. Don't know the adventure. I Googled it real quick that she was in, but it implied some sort of Forgotten Realms module, but I'm not sure. Really liked your comment about how in D&D, she has the potential to just become another monster. It's hard. You got to keep that mystery. I would liken it to how Steven Spielberg did Jaws just brilliantly, keeping the shark out of view. Now, granted, that was due to issues with the mechanical shark working, but that movie still holds in my opinion. It's one of my favorites, and I think it's brilliant. I think it actually has a scene that's quite possibly the best acted scene I've ever seen when the three men are in the bottom of the hole and they're having their little discussion before the shark attacks. But anyway, I think that's how you got to roll with her, keep her secret. In our recent episode on Wasting Time at the Table, we was talking about the Ravenloft setting. I think that's one of the problems with Ravenloft. As cool as Gothic horror is, I'm not so sure that D&D does Gothic horror well. In fact, I played it a lot. I say it doesn't. I think it definitely takes lower level characters. I wouldn't roll in 9th to 12th level characters into Ravenloft because then they're just going to kick the teeth in. Even the lords are going to have a hard time with them. They're going to be able to make quite a mess before the lords get a handle on them, or even if they do. So the Lords of Ravenloft I'm referring to, and I'm assuming you guys know about the Ravenloft setting. I did like it a lot, but I mean, it doesn't seem to work all that well standard-wise with D&D. Lots of manipulating. Keep up the good work. Talk to you later.
Many thanks for the voicemail, Randy.
Yeah, I mean, we're glad you enjoyed the episode about Jenny Greenteeth, and I can sort of see your point about D&D being probably not the ideally suited game for Gothic horror, because let's face it, certainly your stereotypical D&D relies on, you kick down the door, you fight the monsters, you steal their treasure, whereas in a lot of sort of horror fiction and films and stuff like that, just sort of rocking up to the monster with your broadsword isn't really an option. I mean, can you imagine how much less scary The Thing would have been if as soon as it had appeared, they'd have just whooped out broadswords and laid about it and killed it? Or any of Stephen King's books, if the first time the monster showed up, they all just pulled out weapons and beat it to death.
I don't know. I've quite enjoyed the Ravenloft games that I've played in. I quite enjoy those sort of dodgy monster movies where they take apart the Dracula trope or whatever. And Ravenloft feels very much like a D&D version of that to me.
I mean, don't get me wrong, I don't think it's a case of you can't do Gothic horror in D&D. You can certainly bring in elements of it, but I don't think it's the ideal system to do that.
Oh no, if you want to do one of the dark sort of Gothic stories that's all people on a windswept hill and that's secrets right. And threats.
That's my job.
D&D's not ideal for that, but to be honest, that's not really a game I'd want to be playing in anyway. It's fun to watch it as a movie, but it doesn't sound like a lot of fun to me.
See, whereas I would quite enjoy that game, and I try and bring in horror elements into my D&D game, but I don't run it as a horror game as such. It's very much a D&D game with little bits of sort of elements from different horror genres, particularly Lovecraftian sort of horror incorporated in. But it's always a fantasy game with elements of that in it. But thank you again for your call, Randy. Next up, we have a call from Kevin of the Red Caps podcast. Take it away, Kevin.
Hey, John. Hey, Hannah. Just finished your episode on 5 things to put in your DM pack. As soon as you mentioned index cards, I was nodding along and going, yep, John gets me. I would suggest expanding the index cards and making them your character sheets, your pre-gens, your list of names, everything that you have written down coming to a game. Bring it in a nice little recipe box, all nice and organized, all index cards. The other thing I would add is paper clips. They're very useful for connecting cards, especially if you are handing out magical items that are written on a different card. Somebody can paperclip it to their main character sheet. As well, they're good for tracking HP or arrows or spell slots, anything like that. Anyhow, great episode. Keep up the great work. We'll talk again soon. Take care.
Hey, Kevin, glad you enjoyed the episode. Yeah, I'm a massive fan of index cards. One of the things I like to do is I've got a lot of those little bulldog clips. And what you can do is you can clip your sort of stack of index cards down the shortest side, and then it sort of opens up like an impromptu book. So you can sort of like flip through it as you would do a book, but obviously you can just unclip the bulldog clip at any time to move index cards out of it or move them in. I don't tend to go the sort of whole way of having all my character sheets and everything on it, but I certainly have used index cards for a lot of my notes. And my preferred method of storing things online, which is a tiddlywiki, is effectively just like a hypertext linked version of a load of index cards, really.
I was going to say, the actual pen and paper index cards, to me, sounds like a complete and total nightmare.
I'm all about them index cards.
But I have one spreadsheet for a game on which I keep everything, and it may have several pages, like there'll be a page with the character sheets, it's effectively the same thing.
Yeah, it's just different methods of
doing it on my computer, because otherwise I will lose it or get stuff out of order, because I'm that kind of disorganised person. Whereas John's several times run games with index cards, and if you're prepared to put in the work of keeping those index cards up to date, it is an amazing way to keep your system going and give your players easy access to a lot of information.
Yeah, and I think for me, the reason the index cards edge out something like your more standard notebook, which I am a fan of, is like, say, with these clips, I can clip it together so it serves the same function as a book. But if I want to like add stuff in at different points, I can just slide an extra card in there. I'm not going to be like, oh, I've got no pages between this, so I've got to like reference a different page somewhere else in my notebook.
And it might be that you're a GM who prefers like a project book or a ring binder folder or any combination of computer programs. As long as it works for you and you've got an easy way to get at all of your notes in your game, it doesn't matter really what you're using it, like what method you're using to do it.
Oh yeah, entirely agree. Look, I mean, the whole idea of having all these notes is it facilitates you running the game. So if you're using a method and it's not making it easy for you to do, or it's making things more difficult, you need to either tweak that method or find one that suits you better, or sort of like adapt to using it if you really want to go through with it. So if you pick up index cards and you're like, oh, this really isn't working for me, just put it down, find something else that works for you. But like I say, I love the index cards. I love my tiddlywikis online and stuff like that. Anything that lets me sort of add to notes as I go along in sort of like different areas, but also lets me easily track and cross-reference information has got to be a winner for me.
So, yeah, thanks for the voicemail, Kevin. Who's next, John?
Next up, we've got Jason of the Nerds RPG Variety Cast. Take it away, Jason.
I realize I never called you on the maps as visualization or visual story building where Hannah did the map. But I have to tell you, listening to it as a podcast instead of YouTube, I was able to imagine the D4s as, you know, D8s or D12s until, you know, Hannah elaborated and ruined my mental image. But that's okay, because it was still a great episode, and I'll just use Games Workshop scatter dice in the future instead of those hard D4s. But great content you guys have been putting out lately. I know I haven't been calling much, but I have been listening to it all. Really enjoy it, and keep up the great work.
Cheers again for the voicemail, Jason. If you don't want to use D4s, then by all means add an extra 2 options and use D6s.
Yeah, I mean, certainly if you're not using D4s and you're like doing it on your floor like we did, not using those like pointy dice of doom, it certainly means it's going to be less likely that you're going to accidentally tread on your map and like puncture your foot on those devilish dice of doom.
I'll point out that I did also use the lid of a really useful box as a tray to make sure that those pointy D4s did not escape.
Indeed.
Great list of things. GM's grab bag. I don't know. I'm driving. I don't remember what you called it, but it was a great list. As far as dice go, remember, now I wouldn't do this as a GM, I don't think, and I'd probably get annoyed if a player did this. So this might be better if you're just playing solo. But if you have a simple D12 and D20, you can do any dice combination with those, right? The D12 does a D6 and a D12. The D20, well, actually, they can both do a D4, a D8. The D20, of course, can do a D10, a D20, a D100, and a D30. You know, and some of those combinations require the two to be rolled together. But yeah, so you can get away with just carrying 2 dice, and who doesn't always have 2 dice in their pocket? I mean, come on. Really? Anyhow, great show. Looking forward to the next one. You guys take care. Keep up the great work.
Thanks again. That was, of course, Jason from the Nerds RPG Variety Cast. I think you make a very good point about only carrying a couple of dice, and it's not something I'd considered, to be honest.
No, it's a really, really good tip, and I did know this, but it's not something I've used for 20 years, because I live with another gamer, and we have an enormous bucket of dice between us.
Yeah, and to be fair, I just sort of tend to, like, if I'm going to a quick game now, I just tend to use like an app on my phone, because I've always got my phone with me, rather than like carry a load of dice around. But yeah, I think you could certainly do worse than, like, for an emergency or whatever, you know, drop a couple of dice on like your pocket and you are good to go, as Jason rightly said. So it might be worth considering if, as we said when we were doing the episode, you may be going to a con and you've got to travel light, maybe you're going on trains or public transport or whatever, and you can't carry like massive suitcases full of books and dice and stuff like that with you.
Or for that matter, if you just want to invest in some of those really, really nice fancy dice, but you can't afford a full set,
Yeah.
you could just get those too.
I mean, I suppose if space isn't the issue, maybe you want to buy some of those like really nice, sort of like big, like decorative dice. But like you say, they can be quite expensive, so quite big. But if you only need 2 of them, maybe they're a little bit more within reach. Obviously, it's down to your preference about what you choose to use as a like random determiner in your games. But I think Jason definitely makes a good point there, and it could help save a few pennies, which I'm always in favour of. And next up, I think we've got someone who's a first-time caller into the programme, so I'll let them introduce themselves.
Hi, John and Hannah. This is BJ from the Arcane Alienist podcast. I've been listening to you guys for a while. Haven't ever called in. On your things you keep in your GM's kit, that was a great list. One thing I keep in mind, my sort of bag or my go bag as a GM, if I have any house rules or common procedures that I use in a system, I will keep a number of handouts, just a stack of handouts of my house rules or the way I tend to interpret or rule on common issues, just to give to players either at session 0, session 1, or if a new player shows up, I've got some extra ones on hand just to say, hey, here's kind of a quick thing you might want to keep in mind of. You know, if we're playing a certain edition or a certain game system, here's sort of the house rules or the exceptions you'll need to be aware of. Let me know if you have any questions. So that's another thing to keep that's handy to have. Anyway, great episode. Thanks.
Hi BJ, really glad to hear from you. Always nice to hear new callers. Always nice to hear the old callers.
Indeed.
The thing about having your house rules on a sheet for everyone to see, that's a really, really good tip. Also on that sheet, I would suggest having a very quick, here's how you do a skill check, here's how you do a combat roll, here's how you do a spell roll, in the simplest terms it can be put, just to remind people.
Yeah, I mean, I think effectively what we're talking about is cheat sheets, really, aren't we? You know, and I'm a massive fan of cheat sheets. A lot of the games I like Fate, etc., have sort of rule summary sheets in them. If not things like D&D, you know, you have GM screens that have various charts on them. If you can have like a little A4 sheet that's got like, here's the basic rules you need to know, that you can just give out to people, especially at cons, that can save an awful lot of time.
And this is something that where it's like consistent across your game, you can work it into the character sheets as well.
Yes,
if you're
of course.
somebody that enjoys designing character sheets, having all those little notes of this is what this is for, if you can get them succinct and all on one character sheet, it does work really well.
Yeah.
Like the
definitely
Powered by
agree.
the Apocalypse stuff.
Yeah, but like the playbooks, yeah. Yeah, it works very well, because you've got all the sort of facts and the rules you need there sort of under your immediate command. So it saves time flipping up books and looking through them and trying to find obscure rules in your rule books during the game. And anything that saves you having to like flip through a massive book in the middle of a game, I'm a huge fan of. So thank you very much for the call, BJ. Greatly appreciated. And next up, we've got a call from Joe over at the Hindsightless podcast. Take it away, Joe.
Hey, what's up, you two? Another amazing episode. Jenny Greenteeth, love it, absolutely love it. I recently stumbled across a YouTube channel called Scary Fairy Godmother, and she just tells stories of fairies and goes through basically like a fairy bestiary. It's amazing. It's a huge source of inspiration. Like, I could run a million campaigns off of some of these stories. It's really cool. I recommend it. Check it out. Anyway, great stuff. Peace out.
Hey there, Joe. Glad you enjoyed the episode. Thank you very much for the recommendation of that YouTube channel, Scary Fairy Godmother. We're trying to delve into folklore and sort of fairy tales and stuff like that a bit more for the Friday episodes, so we will definitely be checking that out, since both myself and Hannah are fairly interested in these sort of like ancient legends and these old like folklores and monsters and fairy tales.
Another one that I'd recommend for anyone that's not already found it is called John Solo. And he does videos called The Messed Up Origins of Insert Fairy Tale here, or just The Weird Origins of, and some of them are really, really interesting.
One of the things I also like is I quite like the sort of SCP Foundation, so creepypasta stories, which are always about this secretive foundation that confines all these strange monsters and sort of urban myth and stuff like that. So it's not, strictly speaking, ancient like mythology or folklore, but it's like a modern sort of interpretation of that, and like people doing their own like creepy little stories all loosely tied together by this sort of shared patchwork mythology, which I find really interesting. And although there's not a single YouTube site for it, if you just like do a quick search for SCP Foundation on YouTube, you'll get a bajillion videos up talking about various different creatures. Obviously, as with all these things, the quality varies somewhat, but if you're sifting
really
through it,
does.
if you're sifting through it, you can occasionally find like some real like gems within the muck, so to speak. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff out there that you can find. And again, thank you very much for that recommendation, Joe. And I think we've got Jason back from the Nerds RPG Variety Cast now, talking about our recent episode about Jenny Greenteeth.
Great episode. Yeah, it does fall into that hag thing a little bit, those stereotypes, but she's an interesting creature. And you know, over there, it's a really common thing. Not so much over here in the States. So some DM over here in the States might get away with a little bit more using that kind of thing. So depending how they twisted it. But great episode as always. Looking forward to your next one.
Hi Jason, thanks for the message. Never be afraid to use stereotypes in your games. Just be aware that you are doing when you're using them, and consider how you're using them, and like have fun with it. Really, it doesn't matter what you're doing with your game as long as it's entertaining yourself and your players.
And just remember, all old women in D&D are witches.
Yeah, that particular one is just John's thing. It's not that major a thing, but it comes up a lot if you roleplay with John.
That's right, because it's true.
Hey, you two, awesome episodes on spaceships and robots in your D&D game. I'm fully on board. Major spoilers for all you Wheeler Woe fans out there, but where the Wheeler Woe campaign, my campaign, ended before the bad times hit, the party had just acquired the use of a massive flying fortress, which used to be the top of a mountain. It is powered by the soul of a slain gold dragon.
So what I'm getting from what you're telling me there, Joe, is that your campaign is like low fantasy, like down and dirty, sort of gritty low fantasies. Would that be right?
It has cloaking capabilities. It has teleportation detectors. The soul of the dragon is also basically an AI that controls all the operations of the flying fortress.
Okay, maybe not.
And I didn't go the alien technology route. I went the ancient high technology route. I sort of modeled it and was inspired off of the Vimana from Hindu legends. But at the end of the day, spaceship, peace out.
All joking aside, Joe, I've got to agree with you. Spaceships are cool, as I said in the episode. why would you not want to bring a bit of that coolness into your games? And I've got to admit, that floating fortress, like I say, all joking aside, does sound pretty cool. And I love the idea of like a mountaintop being turned upside down and having like a sort of fantasy version of an AI. I think that sounds really cool. And I don't know whether Wheel or Woe is on like permanent hiatus or whether you're going to get back to it. Hopefully, maybe you'll be able to get back to it and continue that story, and we'll be able to find out what's going on with that floating fortress in the future. Thanks again for your call, dude. And next up, we have a call from Spencer at the Keep Off the Borderlands podcast. Take it away, Spencer.
Hi, John. Hi, Hannah. Hope you're both well. It's been a while, but I've been really enjoying your episodes recently. The map stuff, I mean, who doesn't love a good map? I have particular fond memories of the Fighting Fantasy one, the map of Titan. I know it wasn't a particularly detailed map, but I remember having lots of fun trying to figure out where all the books took place.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one, Spencer. I loved the maps of Titan and the drilled-in maps of like Black Sand and places like that were in the Advanced Fighting Fantasy and, of course, the Fighting Fantasy books. And I think the thing they did really well was, even though they weren't that detailed, they sort of captured that, you know, like that Here Be Monsters vibe of like old, sort of like old-timey maps where, you know, you'd look at them and you'd be like, oh, what is in the Scorpion Desert? Well, scorpions, obviously, but what other stuff is there? And it really sort of worked as sort of like an aid to like spur on the imagination and really enhanced the books, because you could look at like these places that like you've not been to any of the game books, and you could be like, oh, I wonder if they're doing a game book that takes place there. Oh, I hope they do, because that sounds really interesting. Oh, there's a swamp here. I wonder if there'll be a book set in that. And you could almost sort of work out where you wanted to go on the map and like get the game books that went to the places you were interested in. So the map was almost sort of like a catalogue of your explorations as well, which I thoroughly enjoyed. And obviously Lord of the Rings and stuff like that. Maps have always been a great thing for me, and they really capture the sort of exploration vibe, which for me personally is one of the things I really love about D&D and fantasy games like that.
Loved the Jenny Greenteeth episode. Certainly look forward to more folkloric stuff if you've got any of those planned.
Yeah, we are enjoying doing the Folklore Fridays, and we are going to continue doing them, but they do take a little bit longer to put together.
Yeah, because of the research and stuff.
Yeah, we are trying to do a bit more work on them, so they might not be out as regularly as the Fiend or Foe Fridays were.
Yeah, and I mean, I think as well, there's certain sort of legends that we're quite familiar with. I mean, the Jenny Greenteeth one, I was fairly familiar with, and I think you were as well. So that didn't take us as long to pull together. Whereas if it's an episode based on folklore that we're not quite so familiar with, then we'll still want to do it, because obviously we'll be finding out more, but it might take us a bit longer to get it together.
Also, if anybody's got any particular monsters that they want us to look at for that,
yeah, just
please, just let us know.
Yeah, drop us a line, and there'll be details at the end of the show as to how you can get in touch, like Spencer's doing now. But anyway, I'm going to butt out and let him finish what he was saying.
And yes, spaceships in fantasy. The Black Hack, yeah, is a really good example, actually. I like the way it's handled there, just that suggestion of the radioactive spaceman, what that might suggest, or you could ignore it completely because, as you say, it's just that one entry. And I remember in a session that we were playing of the Black Hack. I don't think you were playing at the time, but we were exploring some caves which suddenly changed into kind of metallic corridors and these oddly, hexagonal rooms with kind of plinths and flashing lights all over the place. And obviously, as players, you realise that you're exploring a buried spaceship, but as characters, within the context of the game, it's just a very interesting and different environment to explore, and you can obviously develop on that, or you can just leave it as this one-off adventure thing, and you could build on that as the GM, or you can just plant that little seed in the minds of the players and let it work its magic there. they may want to embrace it, and as you say, try and use this spaceship or whatever and go off in any number of directions. It really blows open the whole universe of possibilities. But yeah, let them do the work. Anyway, really enjoyed the show. Take care.
Yeah, thank you very much for the call, Spencer. And I think you're exactly right. One of the things, as I was saying in the episode, that I enjoy about spaceships and robots and stuff like that, those anachronisms in D&D, is that you only really have to lean into it as much as you want. If you want to like get involved with the players taking over a spaceship and flying around, or you want to do like a fantasy version like Joe from Hindsightless was talking about earlier on in this episode, then you can do that. If you just want it to be like a bit of a weird, freaky setting for a dungeon, then you can do that as well. You don't have to go into all the in-depth sort of nitty-gritty of people flying a spaceship and stuff like that. If you don't want to, it could just be a cool backdrop for adventures in a fantasy game.
The other thing that it did get me thinking about, though, is when you introduce a science fiction element into a fantasy game, you then have to ask yourself, how does that interact with magic?
Yes.
Does that mean that magic is actually super duper technology? Or does it mean that magic exists in a world that also has aliens? Because if it is super duper technology, and the like other worlds are way ahead in that technology compared to the world your player characters come from,
They should have magic.
They should also have magic.
Yeah.
And they should be able to wipe the floor with you. But if their world doesn't have magic and yours does, then I could see some like epic battles of dragon versus spaceship.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, and again,
that's basically the Avatar movie's premise.
I think you're exactly right. I mean, if you want to really get into it, you do have to sort of consider that. But as I was just saying, you only have to lean into it as much as you want. Like, if literally all you're using a spaceship for is like a dungeon backdrop, you might not have to worry about how technology and magic interact. Whereas if you want to delve more deeply into it, you do have to put a little bit more thought into that.
I think you need to have at least a couple of answers prepared for your players, even if it's you're going to have to find out in-game.
I don't know, though. Do you really? 'Cause I mean, like with the example we gave in the episode, you know, where we were saying about you can have a ray gun that works like a wand.
I'm not saying that your players are guaranteed to be asking these questions. I'm just saying that if you sat down with 4 other people, odds are one of them's going to want to know.
Yeah, but these, all I'm saying is that if let's say you've run your game, the players have found a ray gun that works like a magic wand, and one of the players turns around and says, like, "Oh, so is this magic or is it technology?" How would the player know? How would the player character know?
I'm not even saying you have to have good answers. I'm just saying you have to have some answers for those questions because they are going to come up.
Yeah, but I think it depends in that case who's asking
All right,
the question.
you win. Who's next?
No. We're going to discuss this now. But I think you're absolutely right. But I just think it comes down to who's asking the questions. Because if the player characters get to a point where they've got enough knowledge to ask that question, I think that's fair enough. You do have to have some answers. If it's like the player asking it, but the character has no idea, then you don't really have to answer it.
I don't know. I think you kind of want to discuss the adventure with the GM to some degree out of character, and
that's fine. But what I'm saying is, if part of like using the future,
at least at the end of the story, if you're not going to be using it again later, then maybe.
See, that's where at the end of the story, I'd just be like, well, maybe you'll find out in the next campaign, because I now know this is a mystery that you're interested in. Why would I not use it in a future game? Because I think certainly, I mean, obviously I'm just talking from my own like personal point of view, but for me, a large part of the appeal of that would be the mystery of trying to find that out. And if you don't find it out, you don't find it out.
If the player asks you, your answer would be, does the player group want more of this in-game? If the answer to that is yes, then they're going to have to find out the rest of the answers later.
Oh, yeah,
if it's
you're
no,
absolutely right, yeah.
You can just say, oh, here's what I put in, here's why I put it in, let's move on and do some more fantasy.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right.
That's all I was trying to get across to you, darling.
I think you're absolutely right. If you're going to have more of it come up further down the road and like the end goal is to find out what's going on, then you need to maybe not have everything lined up, as you were rightly saying at the start, but you need to at least have an idea of like where you're going to be heading with that. Whereas, like you say, if you're just using it as a throwaway thing, you don't really need to be quite so prepared as all that. Right, so let's see who we've got next.
John and Hannah, Hannah and John. It's Barney. Today I've got something. I've got something to call in about, and I'm doing so in a timely fashion. It's Jenny Greenteeth. I think the folklore episodes, I'm all for those. So, keep them coming. But Jenny Greenteeth, that chimes with me. So it's Tipsy Friday, and I'm going to tell you why Jenny Greenteeth is of some significance to me in my recent gaming life.
Ooh, we'd love to hear it.
You may be aware, listeners may be aware, that I've been working on League of Eternal Guardians game system, which started life through discussion with Andy Goodman, and we had this idea for the Eldritch Organ, and we've run some sessions under the aegis of the Eldritch Organ. And for the Eldritch Organ, all players contribute a range of different adventure seeds. And in the first League of Eternal Guardians game, one of the players nominated Jenny Greenteeth as their eldritch entity, and I rolled that randomly, so they were up against Jenny Greenteeth. So from all of these disparate and randomly selected adventure seeds, I, as the GM, was cobbling together a scenario, and in this scenario, Jenny Greenteeth was a member of the aristocracy in England, on the Scottish border, I think in Carlisle, and she was passing as a human being, and maybe had been for some time, and she was responsible for getting back from St. Gallen, getting back an item that belonged in Carlisle but was an eldritch nuclear bomb. And you can hear this adventure, this scenario, as an actual play on Grizzly Peaks Radio. It's also repeated in expeditions to the Grizzly Peaks as well. So you can hear all of this. Everyone can hear this. And basically the bomb was set off, and that was the end of that. But yeah, Jenny revealed herself as quite a fearsome creature. And I'm just flipping back some of the things that you were talking about. I guess I kind of, I integrated her in human society. But because League of Eternal Guardians is a Mythos Cthulhu esque or aligned game setup, Jenny was being pulled in that direction. So I really enjoyed hearing your thoughts about that on the show. So I think Jenny's a great one. Thanks very much for that episode. Again, please, more folklore. I've always been quite impressed with the Lambton Worm. That story's got some interesting thing going on there. Anyway, that's all from me. I hope you're both well. All the best.
Thanks very much, Barney. Glad to hear that your game with Jenny Greenteeth went well and that you enjoyed the episode.
We always love to hear player stories. It's really good fun to listen to them.
Yeah, and thank you for your suggestion of the Lambton Worm. We seem to remember we may have slightly touched on that earlier on, but I can't remember the exact episode. But there's every possibility we might wriggle around to covering that at some point in the future. So That's it for this episode. Thank you very much to all our lovely callers. There will be links in the show notes to their various podcasts. Highly advise you to check them all out. If you'd like to leave us a voicemail, you can do so in a couple of ways. You can either leave us a voicemail message on SpeakPipe, again, link in the description, or you can leave us a message via our old Anchor account, again, link in the description. If you want to send us an email, you can do so. The address is rddrpgpodcast@gmail.com, and you might feature in a future show. Or perhaps you want to tell us what you'd like to see in a future show, whether it be for the Folklore Fridays or just a more general episode. We'd love to get both your feedback and your suggestions. So until we see you again, take care, stay safe, and keep gaming.
Bye.
So I'll let you...